I don't know if everybody saw LinkedIn news today. CNBC article highlighted that many employees are still struggling with well-being, and the majority saying that their health actually worsened or stayed the same from last year. And on the other side, 3 out of 4 executives believe that their workforce well-being has improved. So, during this conversation, we're going to be talking about employee-directed benefits, but also why the disconnect, what's happening in our organizations. And so starting out, welcome to employee-directed benefits, why choice and personalization matter. The second event in Clubhouse HR Top Trends Employee Wellness Series. If you have just started joining us, let us know who you are, where you're from, and what is your interest in the conversation today. So you, the audience, is part of this live. And so if you have a question, add it to the comments. If you have comments on something that one of our panelists is saying, add it to the comments. If you have an interesting perspective on the topic of employee wellness, add your insights and thoughts to the comments. We'll be highlighting your questions and your comments throughout the live show. All right, let's get started. So our first panelist is Daniel Bolas, the CEO of Club Health, voted the #1 platform for employee wellness stipends. So Daniel is on a mission to change how people access health and wellness for the better. So Daniel, in a recent study, 83% of employees said their wellness is important as their salary. And 85% said they're likely to stay in their role if their employer focused more on well-being. So of course, our title of this conversation is called Employee-Directed Benefits. The first question we have to ask are, what are employee-directed benefits?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it's something that's become more and more popular. So the simple definition is just employee-directed benefits are essentially a way to empower employees to choose their own benefits, given some sort of optionality. So common examples are being able to choose different health and wellness benefits or packages, depending on a certain stipend or certain options that an employer might offer. Something I love about employee-directed benefits is this really creates a unique culture within your organization for employees to have a lot of flexibility and ownership over their own benefits. You're kind of showing to your employees that you believe and you're recognizing that there is no one size fits all, especially when it comes to health and wellness, which is really important for diverse distributed workforces, as well as DEIB initiatives, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about later. But I'll stop there and let us continue the conversation from that.
Thanks, Daniel. So in the landscape of it all, what is the landscape of employee-directed benefits? Because this is kind of a new term. And so I think the audience would like to know what actually all of the benefits we're talking about.
Yeah, so the landscape, in a way, you can think about it coming from a lot of us now have some basic optionality behind what kind of health insurance plan we're choosing at organizations. But kind of a lot of the new ways we're talking about employee-directed benefits comes from a lot of other options that are starting to appear, especially when thinking about holistic wellness, financial wellness, mental health, etc. And a lot of these are appearing in what are being called spending accounts for different purposes. So a common spending account that's actually now one of the top 10 searched benefits is called a lifestyle spending account. And what that is simply is just a way for an employer to give employees a stipend to spend on many different things covering holistic wellness and daily lifestyle spend. And that's kind of up to an interpretation of what the employer wants to allow as part of that LSA.
And so you often talk about this. Why are we pairing this lifestyle spending accounts with the marketplace? And you just mentioned it.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this question earlier, and I'm a big analogy person. That's how I think and how I kind of categorize things in my mind. So I think lifestyle spending accounts, again, are a great way to encourage flexibility and inclusion in your benefits and to really show employees that you care about their daily health and well-being, which is so important these days. Why we believe that it's extremely important to pair an LSA with a marketplace is how I think about it is like giving someone $50 in the middle of a desert. It's still helpful. You can still go and find resources, but ultimately, you're kind of starting employees out in a place of isolation and lack of resources, and they have to kind of have the burden to go out and find things that are beneficial to use that stipend account on. Whereas, kind of conversely, if you surround an employee in kind of a marketplace, which to this analogy could be putting someone like in the middle of a thriving farmer's market, it allows an employee to start off from more of a much more resource driven and abundance mindset where they're able to find and match products that really work within their lifestyle without having to feel like the burden is totally placed on them.
So I know in my experience, and not that HSAs are bad, but my experience with an HSA is that I signed up, and then I was like, okay, what am I going to go buy now? What's covered? Go to Walgreens and I look, okay, I'm like, I really need Band-Aids. So I bought the Band-Aids. I'm like, what else do I need? Okay, I really need sunscreen. Okay, I bought the sunscreen. But then I was like, okay, I'm not really sure what else I need here. And so I left. And then eventually the month or the year turned over and I was like, oh, darn, I still haven't spent my whole reimbursement. Let's go buy more Band-Aids. And it's a good thing my kids love Band-Aids, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to use my whole reimbursement, as opposed to like, say, a marketplace. Everybody's very familiar with like Strava and Peloton and like Instacart. And so they know like, oh, I definitely could use food from an Instacart tonight. And then the next day, I definitely feel like I could do workout with Peloton. So to your analogy, it's putting people in a space that they're familiar with and they know what they need, or they see the selection and they can choose. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to elaborate a little further on that point, a lot of people compare LSAs to HSA, FSA. And so that's, again, LSA is the lifestyle spending account. HSA is more of like a health savings account. Some of the main issues with HSAs are that, it by law, it has to be paired with a high deductible plan. And there's a lot of restrictions on where that spending can go. And so it's very rarely something that your whole organization can use, whereas an LSA is very directed by kind of the organization and provides a lot more flexibility in where employees can spend those dollars that are given by the employer.
Thanks, Daniel. So we're going to continue on our conversation now with Dr. Adiola Mead. We can just call her Dr. Mead for short. And Dr. Mead, I wanted to ask you, actually, before I ask you, I'd like to introduce you. So Dr. Adiola Mead is a fractional chief Dr. Adiola Mead is a fractional chief wellbeing officer and the director of Vitality Team Workplace Wellness, providing wellbeing solutions centered on holistic and personalized care. From your perspective as a chief wellness officer, what is the best way for wellness programs to make the most impact on employee success?
That's a really good question. I think the most impactful way that I've seen is to be very clear on the needs of your team. So I think often organizations can want to distribute sort of a one-size-fits-all sort of solution, but everyone comes to work with their individual needs and concerns and weaknesses, both mental and physical. There's a great stat from the American Psychological Association that says that 79% of workers have some mental or physical symptoms from stress, right? And that kind of pairs well with that study you were talking about, because it was about 77% of employees were feeling like their well-being hasn't improved. So it's like the same amount of people that are experiencing all manner of challenges. And if you don't know exactly where your team is and ask specific questions about where they're at and what would be helpful, and then act on that to build trust, then it's really hard to have an impactful solution that you're offering. And that's why I think that's the important reason for having personalization and choice, because you never know what people are dealing with, and they might not share too. They might not feel comfortable sharing, and it might not be appropriate to share in the workplace. But when they know that they have that support that is very focused on helping them as an individual, then it's more likely to be impactful, and you're building trust, so then people can open up a little bit more and share a little bit more, and then you can again continue the cycle of asking and acting on that feedback and building trust.
What's the best way to ask employees?
I think the best way is, I mean, there are a couple. I think it's really important for leadership to be in constant conversation with their team members, right? And having relationships that are continually growing and are, you know, building that trust so that people feel that sense of connection. Because isolation is a big deal, and a lot of us are really suffering from isolation. And we spend most of our time at work. I think 70% of our lives we spend at work. So if we can start to build that sense of connection with leadership, then people are more likely to open up about what their needs are. So that's one, is just having this ongoing conversation with, you know, direct reports and direct managers. And then the other is, if you don't have those, you know, relationships that are as open, or if there are things that you can't really ask as an HR manager or another leader, then I think it's really important to have like an anonymous survey that's third party run, because then that way people who are shy to talk about or don't feel like it's, you know, appropriate to talk about certain things can share a little bit more, and then that data is something that leaders can take and act on.
Thank you. We had a question here from Ernie. Ernie says, hi, from Suriname, HR supervisor, what is the best perspective on wellness needs of employees?
The best perspective on wellness needs. I mean, I want to make sure I understand the question you know, the way you want it answered. But as far as needs, I mean, definitely healthcare needs, having mental health covered, I think is absolutely imperative at this point. There's so many organizations that don't have complete coverage, and it's so detrimental to their team, because, for example, an EAP covers just short-term counseling, and then there isn't always a bridge to long-term care, and then people are kind of left high and dry. So I think coverage for mental health, coverage for preventative care, and that is where kind of the rubber meets the road. So people who maybe don't notice that they're under quite a bit of stress, or they're having ongoing health conditions, if they don't get just the yearly checkup, then you don't know if, you know, your blood work is off or your blood pressure is up. And these are things that you need to keep an eye on before it becomes, you know, a huge chronic disease problem that ends up costing you and the organization more time and money. So I'd say really comprehensive preventative care, really comprehensive mental health care, and then things that also cover well-being, right? So it's not just going to the doctor once a year for a checkup and having a regular counselor, but just those little things. I mean, I'm in the holistic health space, so being able to get body work done and massages and acupuncture and having like an integrated team of care providers makes a huge difference when people are dealing with chronic diseases, which so many people are at this point, both mental and physical. So I'd say those are our needs, you know, on a fundamental level.
And I'm sorry, did you mention nutrition as well? Because I know it's hard to have nutrition when you're working, as well as if you're a working parent, because you're kind of just grabbing a handful of almonds or rushing out the door, or you're eating the toast crusts from the plate of your children just to make sure that you're getting something to eat in the morning because you're so busy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of eating the toast crust and then leaving the house. But I would say yes. So when you're building this integrative team of care providers, nutrition, I think, is an important part of that. Physical activities. Some people really benefit from having like a personal trainer, and that might seem like a nice to have, but for some people, if they don't maintain like their physical structural health, then they end up having a lot more pain syndromes that can cost a lot more time, energy, suffering, but then also in pharmaceuticals. So all that preventative care, all those well-being activities really help you to maintain your health so that you can be your best self and bring your best self to the workplace and to every aspect of your life. So yeah, absolutely nutrition.
Thanks. So Chitra, I see your question, and that's going to be related to what I'm going to be asking Alex in a few minutes. So I'm going to save your question until I talk with Alex. I do have another question for Dr. Mead. what we were just discussing really kind of leads into my next question. It's this, why the shift? Why are we discussing this shift from wellness as like a couple standalone initiatives that you can kind of patchwork together and hope that it works, to this like integrated and holistic approach that really meets employee needs and addresses systemic barriers that we've really been trying to work very hard as HR professionals to overcome within organizations?
Yeah, I think there's been a shift because there's greater awareness and a sense of urgency, not just on hearing what team members are dealing with, but also just on a business scale. In the U.S. just this spring, I think April and May, the stat on job quits was about 4 million a month. Like there's just so many people quitting all the time. So turnover is at record rates. So I think organizations and leaders are starting to realize that we need to do something, especially when people are starting to prioritize well-being above even salary. So I think that's part of the shift, especially coming out of the pandemic. People are realizing that if I don't have my health and my well-being, that it doesn't really matter how much I'm making or what the demands of this job are. And there, in the past, organizations, I think, used to be able to get away with, just that kind of lunch and learn or, this little coffee chat. But I'm finding with organizations that I'm working with that there's more of a burden on both the leadership side and the team side. I had an organization reach out to me that was a global marketing firm because their HR team was feeling so overburdened by what their team members were bringing to them as far as like their health concerns, their physical health concerns, emotional, a lot of mental health concerns. And these HR professionals weren't equipped to help them figure it out. So they were starting to have compassion fatigue, right? So they're exhausted. They don't know exactly how to help them. Their EAP isn't covering all the needs that they have. So they were starting to feel exhausted and burnt out as an HR team trying to deal with everyone else's concerns. So there's that burden that's leading to this understanding that we need more long-term sustainable solutions. And then team members as well are starting to kind of bristle at the idea of a luncheon and trying to fix the problem. Like well-being is a complex problem within an organization. Like everyone is a complex organism, right? And then when you have a team, now we have many complex organisms having complex experiences. And to use imagery, Daniel had a great image of the $50 in the desert, but in my mind, it's more like an organization is hemorrhaging talent, right? And then as a solution, they want to put on a Band-Aid, It's like, okay, here's this Band-Aid. And, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. And it kind of makes it worse. I had an organization that I worked with, and it was a tech firm, and they were around 100 people, and they had already heard that people were feeling overwhelmed and they were starting to burn out, and the workloads were really high, and they weren't feeling connected with their managers. So, I proposed just a beginning, sort of pilot program that would help with a little bit of education, a little bit of helping people get their bearings. But what would really help would be long-term accountability around what changes individuals need to make. So meeting with individuals, figuring out where they're at, giving them resources, and then providing that accountability so they can make progress. Because I've heard before that if reading something or hearing something or scrolling on the internet could fix our problems, and we'd all be rich, handsome, and extremely well, right? Like we need support. We need support from people who know and can help us along. And even after this, short, pilot program with some education, a little bit of just kind of dipping the toe into what would be a long-term solution, the feedback was that, culture changes need to be made, and that what they need is more of a long-term fix. So sometimes it makes it a little bit worse, honestly, because you put a Band-Aid on what is like a gaping wound, and then you tear it off and you still have this gaping wound, but you've also kind of broken trust, right? Like when people were asking for help, you didn't, as an organization, as leaders, really follow through in ways that are meaningful for them long term, so they could relax and not feel like, the pace and the burden of the culture and the aspects of their work life that was detrimental to their health was going to stop, right? So they would feel like this is going to continue and would, in a sense, kind of lose hope and trust in the organization to help them make those meaningful changes.
I do think exactly that organizations do have a responsibility and accountability to support their employee workforce. And whether it is part of the employment contract or whether the employment contract doesn't exist anymore, I think it's just a human thing that you have accountability to support other people. So with that, I am going to move on to having questions for Alex Sellier. Thank you so much, Dr. Mead. Appreciate you giving your perspectives on this. So Alex is the CPO at GHJ Accounting, overseeing people, workplace experience, and internal communications. Under Alex's leadership, GHJ recently won the Transform Award for People Activator in Employee Experience. Welcome to Alex. So the title of this conversation, why does choice and personalization matter?
So it matters in many different ways, and this topic speaks to me personally, but it also speaks to, I think, what we do as a firm. So because we've always said as a firm, GHJ, it's important that we remain fiercely flexible and fiercely independent. So when you think about flexibility, you also think about choice and personalization. We were a firm that was doing flexible working, for example, before the pandemic happened. We didn't really just buck the trend, right? And did that. So we look at that across every part of our sort of, every part of our people strategy and what we do as a business, essentially. I think the other thing why it matters, particularly for us, Corinne, is the fact that our employee value proposition is about being more. So not doing more, not working more, but being more. So I'm bringing your full self to work every day, which Dr. Mead touched on as well, and everyone is different, right? And everyone's needs are different. Everyone's hours they need to work are different because of personal and professional circumstances. And so we keep that in mind. And actually, if you look at our Be More philosophy, it intentionally says family, self, and then firm. Firm is last, whereas normally a lot of companies, or you see clients or firm come first, right? And we intentionally know that you've got to focus on yourself and your family before you can be the best version of yourself for the firm, right? And that then filters down, as you can imagine, into our people strategy and then our total rewards and our benefits strategy. So that's why it's so critical. And I'll also kind of answer this and Chitra's question together a little bit is, I've been at JHJ now a year and a half, and I really came in to transform the function. Dr. Mead talked about Band-Aid solutions, which is my biggest pet peeve. I'm all about long-term strategies. And so in the past, the HR function was very much made up of Band-Aid solutions. So I've switched obviously to transforming, creating long-term strategies. And one of that was around benefits. So when I came in, I noticed that we frankly didn't have the most competitive core benefits, but we had great, what I call, tech ancillary benefits, right? And one of the conversations I had with my boss early on was, we need to pick a lane, right? Are we going to get competitive on core benefits more, or are we going to just focus on getting competitive or staying competitive in these sort of additional perk benefits? Because I said, nobody's looking at these kind of perk benefits since our core benefits aren't the best, right? So you're not even getting them in the door because they're getting sticker shock. So last year, speaking of consistency, we put our money where our mouth was, and we invested $360,000 in our core benefits. And we moved from a statewide plans to a national plan under Cigna because we'd quickly gone from a couple of states to 27 states. So going back to the consistency piece of Chitra's question, you need to have some sort of basic core framework to build off of. If you don't have that, you can't think about personalization. You can't think about spending accounts like Daniel was talking about. So you need to have that in place first. So that was our goal for the first year, which we instituted. So it was progress, not perfection, is my whole mentality, right? This is very much a journey, not a destination when you think about benefits as well, because it's constantly evolving. And then this year, our focus going into 2024 is really about personalization, right? And choice. And we, I know DEIB is a part of that too. We're all different. There are things that we probably are when it comes to benefits, many of us enjoy that are the same, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but there are also things that are very different, and you have to think about that. And that's why spending accounts are things that we are very much focused on. One thing that we've already rolled out is something called Groundswell, which is a company that's focused on democratizing philanthropy. So we've given everyone a $250 personal spending account. And that's also important to us as a business, right? Because of the fact that we have a foundation, and we want to continue to make sure that our employees know that having purpose and giving back is really important as well. So understanding that business overlay is super critical as well. And then the other things we're looking at, as Daniel pointed out, was lifestyle spending accounts, because they can do a lot of different things for different people, right? And I think that's where the difference comes in. Consistency comes from having a basic framework that works across the board, right? And to give you a baseline, spending accounts and other things of that nature create that choice and personalization, right? And so by having both, you're creating an ecosystem that works for many versus few. So that's what I would say to that.
Thanks, Alex. So Tim and Ernie, I do see your questions. I think we're going to keep those for when we go into the Q&A. I have one last question for Alex, and I'm going to throw that up right now. So Alex, we talked all about choice personalization. I am a firm believer that people are business and business is people. But there are people out there saying, okay, well, you're in HR and you have to have a business, you have to have a business reason for doing what you're doing. So what are the business outcomes for choice and personalization?
Yeah, well, I think some of my fellow panelists touched on it already. I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, I think we kind of, first of all, have a moral obligation to some of these things, right? Like, a lot of us have moved to dispersed workforces. We can't see our employees like we used to. We don't really know, unless they're volunteering certain information, what they're going through. So at least by creating choice and personalization, you're getting in front of that in some way, right? So I think there's the moral obligation piece. Another thing is productivity, right? I think that your most productive self when you're also able to take care of yourself. And as a company, if you're affording the options to do that, you're helping your employees be their best selves and their most productive selves. I also think we need to get better at talking about things that can have a stigma associated and normalize that language. In the past, things like mental health were more taboo. Luckily, as a country, at least within the US, I know we have a lot of different countries here and it's different by country. That conversation is very much normalized, but now we're starting to talk about other men's and women's physical health issues. And I think we need to get comfortable with that, because that also affects your ability to get your day-to-day job done, right? So without having that kind of level of personalization, the business suffers because they're not really taking into account what people are going through.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. To your point, Tracy Spanenberg threw up a LinkedIn post today saying we really need to talk about menopause. It's completely uncomfortable. That is something we need to start talking about more, and not just menopause, but premenopause. And we also need to talk about men's health.
Yep.
We often think that men's health maybe isn't as taboo as women's health, but when you get really right into the nuts and bolts, it is. So to your point, we need to start talking about both of things, items more in depth.
Yeah, and I'll just
ahead.
add to Corinne quickly. Like, I went to a legal conference about a month or two ago, and one of the sessions was on the 4 M's. It was, to your point, menopause, menstruation, miscarriage, and maternity. And years ago, you wouldn't imagine seeing like a panel that was made up of those things. But the point being that women are saying these things prove to be a struggle on a day-to-day basis as I'm working, and my work life is my personal life and vice versa. And I will share on a personal level, I've experienced in the last few months low testosterone. And I've said this on a couple of different panels and even to my team. And I said to people, you might be wondering, why is this guy talking about low testosterone? And it's for 2 reasons. One, to normalize the conversation because men's health issues are real, but also because people don't realize that low testosterone can create low energy and low focus. So if my team wonders, hey, Alex seems a little bit low energy or low focus someday, they'll understand the why behind it a little better. So I think we need to get better about having these conversations, not to like get in anyone's business, but to better understand what people are going through.
Yeah, no, I love that. We don't want to get in people's business, but we want to help them. We want to support them. We want to know what they're going through. We're here.
Yeah.
So, which is a complete, I think 360 then probably 5 years ago when we were told to like not interfere with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into the Q&A, I'm just going to talk about 2 statistics that I thought were really interesting regarding the business outcomes for personalization and choice. So companies with workplace wellness programs in place report 66% in productivity increase and 67% increase in employee satisfaction. And industry reports show that $1.47 return on investment for every dollar spent on corporate wellness initiatives. So there definitely is an ROI for really diversifying and giving your benefits, employee benefits, directed benefits by employees, and also choice and personalization. So thank you, panel. Appreciate your insights. We're going to head over to our Q&A because the audience in the conversation is very interested in getting their questions answered. So I'm going to go ahead and put us into Foursquare here and jump into the comments. Question from Tim. Are there high-low effort or low-cost initiatives employers could prioritize? Let's go to Daniel for this one first.
Yeah, so thank you, Tim, for this question. That's something we focus on at Club Health. So, and we're a type of lifestyle spending account, and like we talked about today, that's a great way to provide a lot of flexibility and choice in this realm of well-being, and allowing people to kind of self-direct and make the most efficient use of those funds. So we operate in this field of how can we create a marketplace that naturally has a lot of low-cost, high-value items that allow, even with a low budget, employees to really move the needle in their own personal health and wellness, and that kind of drives a lot of prioritization around these things without having to front a super heavy bill.
Dr. Mead, what do you think?
I would echo what Daniel is saying, giving people options that has a range of, value and cost. But I always go back to how every organization has individual needs, right? Like you might poll your people and what might be high value and low cost in one organization would be completely different based on their needs compared to another organization. So I think really figuring out what is it that is most meaningful for your team, and then figuring out what's the most cost-effective way to provide that, and in a way that is meaningful and is impactful for them, and then going from there. And I think a great way to reduce costs too is to get feedback and just to circle back fairly consistently, because sometimes what is working this month, this year, this season, in another month, year, season just isn't. People aren't using it as much, or they tried it and then, they've exhausted its functionality. So instead of continuing to spend money on it, then you can be more limber and flexible in a business sense, and try something else and poll again and figure out and just stay in that conversation. I think that's the best way to get your highest ROI.
Thank you. Alex, did you want to add anything here?
Just yes to everything both Daniel and Dr. Mead already said. But the only thing I would add is, and Dr. Mead alluded to it when she was answering a question earlier, is one thing we did that is something I recommend to everyone is doing some sort of benefit survey, trying to better understanding what are the needs of your population, and doing that maybe on an annual basis, because they'll continue to evolve and change. And because what your leadership thinks and what your employees think can be 2 very different things. So without the data, you could just be coming up with decisions in a vacuum that don't actually align or meet your employees where they're at. So that's the other thing I would add.
Yeah, and we saw the LinkedIn editorial this morning. There is absolute a disconnect between what leaders in C-suite think and what employers are feeling. So we're going to go to a question that we received pre-live, and I wanted to grab that really quickly. And this is from Andrea Payne. So how can diversity, equity, inclusion belonging practitioners become more trauma informed in our work to address employee well-being needs. We minimize the trauma of having just survived an unprecedented global pandemic and its impact on us collectively. And those of us who work in trauma-laden environments like healthcare and legal, our own issues become aggravated by absorbing the trauma of others. It's a long question, but I kind of narrowed it down. And this is from Andrea Payne, and this is a pre-live question that we got. Who wants to jump in first with this? Okay, Dr. Mead.
Wanted to just piggyback on what Alex was saying too about doing that. The audit of your benefits is also, a lot of times people don't know what all their benefits are. So sometimes it's just like recommunicating, here's what we have access to, and people are busy and things, fall off of radar. So sometimes the most cost-effective thing is just to remind people what they have access to, and then you might see like an increase in usage of it. But for Andrew's question, I think there's a framework that I teach is this like triple A's, right? So the most important thing about being trauma informed is to really be well informed about the trauma that your team is experiencing. And the first is to ask, right? So to keep those lines of communication open, and then to acknowledge too. Sometimes, even in personal conversations, you might share something with someone that's a burden for you, and you'll get like a blank stare or a change of the subject. And I think it makes a big difference, even if you don't know what to say or how to fix it, just to acknowledge like this, I see that this is really hard for you. I can understand how hard this would be, and to listen. So acknowledging, asking, and then acting, right? So acting in a way that is both clear in terms of the values of your organization and your personal values as a leader, but then acting in a way that shows support. So you can ask, how can I support you? Or here's some things we already have in to your disposal that you can use, but making sure that you act in a way that builds trust, because there's nothing that compounds trauma than to share what you're dealing with, and then for someone to not do anything or to do something that's more harmful or to just act like it never happened. So I think those three things together make it so that you're at least creating a space where people can share and get the support they need, and also like not being afraid to consult with professionals, like in workspaces, like we're not psychologists and, psychotherapists and psychiatrists and medical professionals. But if you consult with one and just ask, here's, once you figure out what's going on with your team, here's what people are struggling with, what's a good way for us to support them that would be really meaningful for them. I think that's a great way to not put the burden on those who are traumatized. Like when we're feeling burdened or traumatized, the last thing we have is a laundry list of, to-dos for the people to help us. It's so much more helpful if someone can come alongside you and help to support you with some options, because sometimes you just can't think of all the answers, and it shouldn't be all your responsibility either. So consulting with outside professionals who understand that type of trauma could give you some really great clues on how to move forward and acting, in integrity and in line with values in supportive ways.
Thank you. Alex or Daniel, did you want to add anything to that?
I will, just because this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I will say that I think sometimes where companies miss the mark is that they need to recognize that when somebody joins their company, they could have come from a workplace where they did experience trauma. And part of your job is actually going to be unraveling that and breaking down those walls, right? And I've had to do that in a leader in certain places. I've realized that employees on my team may have come from very different environments. And I can't just say, well, we're psychologically safe. That's not enough. They need to see psychological safety in action, whether that is how your team laughs together, how they make fun of each other, how they, that's got to be lived and breathed versus just throwing concepts at somebody. So, and you got to recognize it's not going to take a day. It's not going to take a week. It's going to happen over time. And gradually their walls are going to come down because you really don't know what they've come across. They also tend to share things over time. Like, hey, it's really great that, one thing I've heard in the past is it's really great that you make it really open, that you want people's ideas and questions. In the past, that was a no-no from where I came from, right? And that's just a small example, but that then you have to think that takes time for somebody to feel comfortable opening up in more of a public setting. So I just think we need to meet people where they're at and know that, hey, you may be hiring someone who's fantastic, but they may have just come from dealing with some workplace trauma as well.
I think every professional has dealt with workplace trauma, some more than others. I know myself included, and one of my best friends as well. And it's really hard to go back into the workplace. And it's kind of one of the reasons why I think a significant number of people do try to stay out of the workplace for a while they do heal.
Well, and I know, and to your point, Corinne, I know people that have taken sabbaticals or they've moved into more advisory roles versus operator roles because they just feel burnt out. And that might not be a forever thing, but they definitely know that it's got to be for a certain period of time kind of a thing as well.
So, Daniel, I don't know, did you have anything to add to that question? Otherwise, I've got another question, two other questions to ask and a comment.
I think that was so profound. I'll just move on to the next topic. That was Dr. Mead and Alex slammed that one.
Oh, so I wanted to go, this is a question that I wanted to know. What can we as people operations practitioners envision benefits for our workforce in the near future? So if you had a magic wand and you wanted to say, I am going to change benefits tomorrow, what would it look like? And I'm going to jump to, let's have Daniel answer this question first.
Yeah, I think so many thoughts here, and I think even the term benefits is maybe no longer the best term. One of our interns recently said, like, well-being should be at the forefront of working, and I think the LinkedIn news article of the day, I just want to go back to that, and it says 84% of workers said bettering their mental, physical, and financial health has become a top priority, and 74% place it above making career gains. And I think this goes back to kind of exactly mirroring what Alex was saying earlier. If we don't have that core like foundation as human, your example before was in organizational benefits, but also as humans, if we don't have that core well-being, like progressing in our career makes a lot less sense and isn't as satisfactory if we're not, if we don't have wellness ourselves. And so I think, kind of to circle back to the question, I think well-being is kind of at the forefront of the future workplace. And I think without that, it can be hard to progress in a bunch of different domains following that.
Yeah, to your point, I've always, I reflected at one point why we call total rewards rewards. Like, is it a reward to be healthy? That's my big question. Is it a benefit to be healthy? It's a human need to be healthy. So to your point, I think a good idea would be changing the terms. So jumping to Alex, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly on changing the terms. I don't think it's reflective of where we are today as a society, first and foremost. I also love that we have somebody like Dr. Mead who's on here as a Chief Wellbeing Officer, because I also think that that's just, we're going to see more people in those roles as time goes on. I think that's really important because, and she spoke to it before, this can become, now for HR practitioners, it is becoming very much almost a full-time job, right? So so that's going to be critical, understanding how much time you and your team are dedicating to these things as well. I also think that you have to think about where your business is at and what they need as well. It's going back to kind of like, this is not a one size fits all. It's a one for one, right? Like, I recognize where my business was at when I started. And I had to build off of that. Everyone's maturity level and where they're at is very different. And then the other thing is also recognizing that not all roads, compensation is important, but one of the things we even heard now is going back to, I think, the point that Daniel made is also like people want quality of life right now as well. That's been a big shift in the US. It's more a la what I used to see in Europe, for example, is that, we're hearing, more junior level employees say, hey, it's great to be a partner and make a lot of money, but we see the kind of hours they work and we don't want to work those kind of hours. We want quality of life. So I also think the pendulum is swinging a little bit on that. And I think if you're a people practitioner, you need to think about how to support your people during those periods of time, especially when people have busy seasons like we do. What are you going to do to help them when they're out of their busy seasons? What are you going to do to create that level of support and structure as well? So, and I would also say, if you're not looking at your benefits strategy at least once or twice a year to see if it's still fit for purpose, you're missing the mark, because so much is changing so quickly as well.
And I think I go back to add on to that. One of the things that Dr. Mead said earlier on in the conversation is that as people practitioners or people operations people, we need to equip managers. I think that's a huge gap right now that just needs to be helped. I mean, normally, what I think it was the statistics that more people leave their manager than they do the organization.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dr. Meads, yes.
And
So I'll be quiet now and go ahead.
One thing I just wanted to add, because as you were speaking, Corinne, a thought popped into my head. One thing I'd like to do that we have an institute, but I did it at a prior company, is create well-being champions as well within the business to that degree. We had it at a prior business. We do use the kind of champion piece a lot at our firm. We're talking about creating feedback champions. We have early careers champions. We have people enablement champions, because it goes back, like, also not all roads just lead to the people team. Like, we can facilitate the conversation. We can actually create the infrastructure. But if you are not doing it in your business day to day, you're not helping to do it yourself so that it could be scalable, then it's going to be challenging as well. So sorry, I just wanted to add that, Dr. Mead.
No, I think all ads are great. Dr. Mead, what do you think about this question?
I love that. Everything everyone has said, I think, has just been so spot on. And just to I don't know, where do I even start? What Corinne said about equipping managers and people leaving their managers. And there was a stat, I think months ago, that managers are as influential in the lives of people as their spouses, right? So this is a really important relationship. So it's important for it to be healthy. And one of the three tenets of vitality and workplace wellness is care, connection, and culture. So connecting people to care, like Alex was saying, like, he was very open about his low testosterone and what that means. So people need to be educated about what physical concerns might translate to in relating to people on your team. But then I think the future is also connecting people to the care that they need within the workplace. Like, I feel like the workplace is the frontier of healthcare. This is where most people get their healthcare. So if organizations are not leading that charge, then a lot of people suffer if they're not getting the best care provided through their organization. And then making sure that the care that they're connected to is holistic, right? Like, you want to make sure that people who are working with your team members can look at them as a whole person within a whole organization, and treating them in context is really important. And like Alex was saying too, like, having those peer relationships, I think, is really important. I mentioned before that isolation is a really detrimental factor for our mental health, our physical health. But when you're creating, professional accountability, but then peer accountability and support, then people start to feel like they belong in this space. So if it's like an ERG or having those well-being champions, then people are coming to a space where they can discuss their well-being and get the care that they need. And then it kind of automatically creates a culture where it's psychologically safe, where their well-being is clearly prioritized. But in any culture, like in a garden, you need to prune, things that aren't working. And that's where I think leaders can come in and make sure that they are listening to feedback and acting on it, and directing the channel so that all the conversations are meaningful and all the relationships are flourishing the way that they need to. So yeah, I think that's the future too.
Thank you, Dr. Mead. So audience, we have some resources for you that came from Club Health. Sarah Marie is going to go ahead and drop those in the comments if she already hasn't. And then also, if you want to chat with Daniel about anything regarding Club Health or anything regarding well-being or mental health or wellness, lifestyle spending accounts, or HSAs, then go ahead, and Tia Marie is also going to drop Daniel's meeting link in the chat as well. So we're going back to the audience really quickly because I just saw some, I think there we go. Angie said, I recently implemented a monthly lifestyle stipend. Many high-tech SaaS companies have. Yeah, I think I think lifestyle stipends are really excellent because, as we've all mentioned, somebody is in different stages, not just in their lives, but also different stages in their lives within the month or within the week. So I think that's really important. To what someone had said, awesome panel, thank you all. We have one comment that we didn't highlight. This is from Andrea Payne. She said, so true. This is when we were talking about menopause, premenopause, and men's and women's health concerns about making them, taking away the stigma and the taboo. Andrea said, I posted an article last year about the tampon shortage and how it impacted people who menstruate as companies were implementing return to office plans without even discussing this or considering how it impacted a significant portion of the workforce. Yeah, interesting. I didn't even think about that. All right, so we're wrapping it up right now, and we have about 45 seconds before we end this live. If there's any questions that you have that didn't get answered today, or any questions that you have that you didn't want to have us answer live, go ahead and shoot either Alex, myself, Dr. Mead, or Daniel a LinkedIn DM, and we'd be very happy to answer those questions as well. Please follow us if you would to learn more about the work we're doing, and also follow Club Health to stay tuned for the next event in this series coming out, TBD right now. Thank you very much, audience. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And audience, panel, thank you so much as well for sharing your time and your talents with us. Thank you, Club Health community, for ensuring that this live is a success. And thank you, LinkedIn, for letting us go live. All right, everybody, have a fantastic day.